Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media. People have been asking, when are you going to get Mike Jones back on? I think Mike thinks this is a good time to come back on, partly because there's so much coming onto the table right now. And I was thinking about Mike, I've heard him say it often. He said all he does, I don't really do much. I read and I write. So he kind of has the life of the man of leisure in a sense. I mean, I don't think he would call it leisure per se, but it's leisure in the sense of giving your focus to things that should be meditated on. There's a passage that says, only without leisure can a man become wise. So with so much hitting, unless you have a depth of good reading on the history of things, you're going to look maybe at the trucker incident and you may miss something that's contributing to what's going on. Okay, so the title of the show is A War on Representative Government, and Citizens for Community Media itself plays into representative government. I mean, they relate to each other, because without this going out here locally, and you're going to rely on the South Bend Tribune to inform the people, or the internet will inform them. Well, you have, on one hand, you have hardly anything, and on the other hand, you have way too much. So how do you, if somebody in the local community isn't helping to process this and say, okay, here's what I think is going on, and brings forth a discussion, the local communities will be in the dark.
Right. You need the power of the mind here. The mind can take diversity, all of these facts, and it can meditate on them and bring a unity, a focus to all of these things. That's what the mind does. That's what art is, that's what philosophy is. And you're right, you do need leisure to do this. It's the Latin word is otium, and the opposite of otium is negotium, which is translated as busyness or business. So the philosopher takes a step back from the world of busyness and meditates on things to get the big picture. So what is the big picture? The big picture, that ever since we've been doing this, has been the war on representative government. I can remember talking about the attack in Indianapolis, started in Indianapolis with the attack on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, when the oligarchs, Mark Benioff, showed up and told the legislators to overturn the law they had just passed, protecting the citizens of Indiana, because he didn't like it. A man who's from San Francisco, a manifestation of the Jewish revolutionary spirit, who's always trying to meddle in your culture and trying to overturn your customs and your beliefs. And he succeeded, because Mike Pence, who was then the governor, was too stupid to understand that this is an attack on him as the representative of representative government. And so he should have had him arrested for trying to overthrow the government, which is precisely what the Democrats did after that protest in Washington last year. A peaceful protest got orchestrated, turned around, and given a false identity as an insurrection, because they stole the government, they stole the election.
And you, right after that happened, you came on and talked about a color revolution, how that
right.
was.
This was a color revolution aimed at the people of the United States. So basically what you have here is you unleashed this demon in 1953 when you created the CIA, and they created ways to overthrow governments throughout the world. The first one was the government of Iran in 1953, when they overthrew Mossadegh and put the Shah in power. You orchestrate public opinion, you give the sense that everything is happening, and then the government falls and you take over. Well, they're using the same tactics on us, on our representative government.
Do you think at the bottom of it is hubris or pride in the American people? In other words, we won World War II, so we have an automatic right to rule the world, and we can use CIA to maneuver things.
I think the narrative as we know it began with World War II. I don't think there's any question. At this moment, at the end of World War II, you had a situation where the Allies had been involved in criminal activity for the entire length of the war. The British had been involved in the saturation bombing of civilians, which is a war crime. They were involved in the firebombing of Dresden and Hamburg. And the Americans were a part of that too. And so they come to the end of the war, Germany is in ruins, and they come to the camps and suddenly they realize, here's a chance. We're going to make videos of these camps, and we're going to tell the world that the Nazis were exterminating their own people.
But you said part of the reason was the guilt, their own guilt of having violated the Geneva Convention on bombing civilians.
Right.
And so this was a diversion for the public and themselves.
Right. It helped calm their guilty consciences. It also helped distract everyone from the war crimes they had committed, and everything got blamed on Germany. And you had this farce known as the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, which was a farce from beginning to end, a legal farce. Even the judges themselves, Judge Jackson says, look, if you want to go out and shoot the Germans, okay, that's fine. But don't pretend that there's some type of legal proceeding, that is justified by the rule of law. It's not. So you're right, it began then, and it has proceeded along those lines. And Germany is very important in this regard. Germany is extremely important if you want to understand what's going on, because what's going on now is what happened in Germany. You had an extremely successful regime of social engineering imposed on the Germans, basically broke their spirit, broke the German spirit. And then after it got imposed on them, it got imposed on the rest of the world through the American Empire. But more importantly, it got imposed on the Catholic Church. I've written the latest issue of Culture Wars. The cover article is about synodality. This whole movement within the Catholic Church to sort of make a big survey, a big meeting. What is the people of God thinking? Well, first of all, this is preposterous. To think that you can survey 1.2 billion Catholics throughout the world and come up with one opinion, we're going to do this. No, it's a sham, because all the information is always going to be passed up. So you would sit at your local parish here, and 5 people would sit around the table, and then you'd talk, and then one guy would say, I'll summarize it. He goes, and then he summarizes, leaving stuff out, what he thinks is important, because all that passes all the way up the chain. And so I said this before to the associate pastor at St. Pat's. I said, this is a charade. We know what they're going to say. I'll tell you what they're going to say.
But this is almost like a phony type of representative government, because Pete Buttigieg will have a town hall meeting.
Right.
And it'll be just as phony, but it's like there's this god of democracy up there. They have to, okay, this is what we're supposed to do. And the church is kind of like...
The church is not a democracy.
I know
okay?
it, but this process is like a democracy thing.
It's sham democracy. Because what I'm saying here is that just as, like Pete Buttigieg was a classic example of what I'm talking about. Pete Buttigieg was the Justin Trudeau of South Bend, Indiana, who went through the motions of representative government, but was always imposing oligarchic rule on the people of South Bend. And if you went along with it, he'd pat you on the head. And if you didn't go along with it, as I didn't, he would call you a fringe activist, which is what he called me in his autobiography. Pete, you grew up down the street from me. You lived on the same street with me, 2 houses down, for 30 years. Your entire life up to the time you went away to college, 18 years, and you don't know my name? Even though you say my name when you see me on the street and say hello, you forgot my name in the book. This is identity theft. Pete is a master at identity theft. This is what the oligarchs do. They steal your real identity. I'm a resident of South Bend, Indiana. And they give you their label as a way of denying you your ability to speak. That's exactly what he did. He's a master of it. He parlayed that into a position in Washington, and he's probably going to run for president again. Won't win, but he'll laugh all the way to the bank. that's a classic example of what we're talking about. That is the antithesis of representative government. It's a parody of representative
But he
government.
almost was made by his dad, too. In other words, his dad was pretty cunning. And
His dad was very cunning. His dad was a former Jesuit who became a professor of English at Notre Dame and parlayed basically nothing in terms of publication. There's one book of his in the Notre Dame library. It's his doctoral dissertation, which is a stale, cliched version of everything he would ridicule later on in life. But his real cause in life was the notebooks of Antonio Gramsci, who was a communist who had been thrown in jail during the fascist era in Italy, and wrote these notebooks on basically how to subvert a conservative society like Italy, or like Notre Dame, which is what he did. And the point here is take over the culture. You know, it's not the means of production, it's the culture. Take over the culture. And there are certain techniques. You can pervert Christianity, you make the victim the center of your cause, and so on. And he parlayed basically nothing other than that into an endowed chair at Notre Dame until he died of lung cancer. So Pete it says in his biography, he sat at the table and listened to his father spout off to all the other revolutionaries at Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is a revolutionary outpost, and it's there to produce commissars who will then rule over the people and get them to do what the oligarchs want them to do. That's the situation throughout the world right now.
But Notre Dame is similar to Germany. In other words, Germany is a strategic place to subvert, which they succeeded. And Notre Dame, from a military, that's a strategic point that we would like to subvert.
Because it provides an entry point into the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And that's precisely what Notre Dame did long before Buttigieg arrived on the scene. Father Hesburgh became a proxy warrior for the Rockefellers in the birth control battles of the 1960s, basically helped Rockefeller subvert the church's teaching, held secret conferences at Notre Dame where they subverted the church's teaching. So once again, you've got a local institution. They're not working for the Catholic Church. He's working for the Rockefellers. Hesburgh's job is to get the church to follow the lead of the Rockefellers on birth control. That was what made him as a figure. That's why he ended up on the Rockefeller Foundation, Board of Trustees at Harvard, and the world's record in the Guinness Book of Records for honorary doctorates. All because he was a loyal servant of oligarchic interest in their attempt to destroy the Catholic Church.
Well, I was just at a meeting this morning, a meeting that you know about, and one of the guys was saying, we're blowing you guys away. We're having all the children, and you guys have none. Was that part of the Rockefeller on purpose to limit the number of children?
Of course it was.
Yeah, and for what reason?
Because demographic power is the basis of political power.
So who are they attacking? Who are they after? Who are they targeting?
Well, who's they? First of all, who are the Rockefellers? There are three, it's the triple melting pot. There are three ethnic groups in the United States, Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. And the WASP elite, obviously, they're white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. The Rockefellers were traditionally Northern Baptists, but at this point, Protestantism had become a kind of ethnic rather than religious identity. And they ruled the roost, let's say, right after World War II. They were the ruling class right after World War II. And they were worried about two groups. They were worried about Negroes and they were worried about Catholics, because neither of these groups used contraception. Whereas all of the Protestant denominations had accepted contraception as simply part of what sensible people did. So you have an imbalance like that. It began in the 1920s. It's in The Great Gatsby. Yeah, so the Rockefellers were inspired by the eugenics movement. They wanted to lower the birth rates of the people they were competing against. There was a guy named Packard who was on the board of the Rockefellers, and he said, I don't like Planned Parenthood because Planned Parenthood gets everyone to reduce their children. We don't want our people to reduce the number of their children. We want them to reduce. So in other words, Negroes and Catholics. So Margaret Sanger created the Negro Project. The founder of Planned Parenthood, what is now called Planned Parenthood, founded something called the Negro Project, which is basically get Negroes to stop having children. Okay, now the church was more centralized than that, and so they could go after. So basically, Hesburgh arranged a meeting with between Rockefeller and Paul VI, when Paul VI was contemplating writing his birth control encyclical Humanae Vitae, and Rockefeller volunteered to write it for him. Mighty white of you, John D. That's what the Pope said. That's mighty white of you to do that. Of course, he said it in Italian, but. So it failed in that sense, in that the Pope did not endorse birth control. But who cares? Because you got Hesburgh and Notre Dame and all of these. There was a rebellion in the Catholic Church. The professoriate rejected Humanae Vitae, and they basically the universities went down that path. Well, as Paul VI said, if you reject the connection between sex and procreation, you're going to end up promoting homosexuality. And guess what happened? You have Notre Dame as one of the prime promoters of homosexuality in our area.
Yeah, that's Malloy writing the book.
The rainbow flag flies all over the place. More rainbow flags than American or papal flags over there. They have taken over the institution, which is precisely what Joe Buttigieg orchestrated through Gramsci. So they did that, and so it no longer, that university is the paradigm that we're talking about. It's been taken over by oligarchs through their proxy warriors, the professors, and their proxy warriors then train the children, or the kids who come there, not to be Catholics, but to be loyal servants of the oligarchs. That's why you go to Notre Dame. You get a job at the FBI, policing other Catholics, making sure they don't stray off the reservation. That's what happened here. It happened, first of all, in Germany, because they lost the war. They were completely defenseless at this point. And at this point, all of the Jews who ran away in the 1930s came back lusting for vengeance against the German people.
Is there a way to look at World War I and World War II as like one war, and when you lose a war like that, then all bets are off. They can do with you with whatever you want. I mean, normally they might kill you, make you a slave. So they're going to do whatever they want.
Now the question is, who is they? Who is they? And this became a big dispute after the war. Now, some of the most ferocious, vengeance-seeking people there were the Jews. And you had people like Secretary of the Treasury Morgenthau proposing the Morgenthau Plan, which was basically to starve the German people to death. And that took place. He did it. Not to death, but they were starving.
But Americans don't realize, because I remember talking to Inga she was the German lady at the farmer's market, and we're talking about Mein Kampf. I'm speaking to her in German, Mein Kampf, and My Fight, Hitler's book. And I said, Inga, who are you guys fighting? And she looked at me like I was like stupid or something. She goes, the Jews. So in other words, people don't realize that the Germans were very aware that's who they were fighting.
Well, so were the Jews.
But so the average person.
So what you have is a situation where, all right, the Jews are upset, and so they create the World Jewish Congress in the I think it was 1935, something like that. And the first thing they do is declare war on Germany. Well, the Germans react with Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was basically Germans going around Nazis breaking the windows of Jewish shops.
But that's because they had.
It's a classic situation. The big Jews get out, stand around, they thump their chest, and they start, attacking people. It's the little Jews that paid the price. The Trotskys make the war, and the Bronsteins pay for it. That's a Russian proverb, I think. So this is what happened. So now it's 46, 47. The Jews are now in power in Germany. The 75% of the staff at the Nuremberg War Tribunal were Jews. Judge Jackson is upset because you can't talk to these people. You've got a situation where they're lusting for revenge, and they're ruining the situation. Now, Morgenthau's assistant was Harry Dexter White, or Weiss. He was a Soviet spy. And the plan, I think, the one that makes most sense, is you want to make the Germans so miserable that they'll long for the Russians to come in, the Soviets, and take over. That was the plan. I think that was the ultimate Weiss's plan, White's plan. But that wasn't Americans. The Americans were represented by Herbert Hoover, who was a Quaker, and the Quakers had made a big impression on people like Henry Regner, his father, during World War I, because when Winston Churchill was starving the Quakers to death with his naval boycott, the Quakers collected food and sent it to Germany. It was called the Quakerspeise. And so here we are back again, and the Quakers, Herbert Hoover is upset because this is not right. And so there's this battle in the public media, the public square. Like, you can't do this. If you do this to the Germans, you're no different than the Nazis. And the Jews were pressing, no, we have to punish the German people. Eisenhower was ferociously on the side of the Jews. He was he has his own criminal behavior to cover up. He was the Rheinwiesenlager. He just put Germany, he refused to declare the Germans that he captured as prisoners of war, stuck them out on the Rhine Meadow camps, and they starved to death. Thousands. The question is, how many? That's the only question. We know he did it. We know lots of them died. We know it was cruel and it was a war crime. So why are we quibbling about the number of people?
That goes back to this, that the word slave means to spare, and that when you fought wars in the past, which I can't comprehend, they felt they could just kill them.
Right. But Christianity intervened.
Exactly.
And it said, no, you can't treat people like that. Even in times of war, you have to behave in a moral fashion. And so the Geneva Conventions were expression of Christian Europe. And you can't do that kind of stuff. The United States, the Soviet Union, and England completely held these conventions in contempt, did not follow them at all. And then they blamed the Germans for doing precisely what they did.
But they had been doing, after the Civil War, when Sheridan went over to Europe, he couldn't, they were appalled by how the Northerners...
Sherman.
Well, I think it was Sheridan that went to Europe. And Sherman, they were all in on it together, but Sheridan was representing Sherman. And this is how we fought the war, and they couldn't believe it. This was so against Christian warfare.
No, you don't wage war against the civilian population. Unless you're in the United States of America and you have a lot of airplanes. And that's what they decided. They're going to wage war on the civilian population, wear them down so that Germany surrenders. What they did was prolong the war. It was a horrendous mistake. Many Americans died because of it. Thousands of Germans died. But so it's over now. And now the question is, are we going to let the Jews determine how we treat the Germans? And the American people rose up and said no. Roosevelt died. Morgenthau was pushing Truman around when Truman said, sorry, we're not going to do it. And they came up with the Marshall Plan, which was a better way. All right, we're not going to starve the Germans to death, but we're going to have, in many ways, something worse, which is called social engineering. And that's what they instituted. So you still have the Jews here in Germany, still calling the shots. There's David Mordecai Levy, is a Jewish psychiatrist from New York City. And in order to get a license to publish a magazine or a book or a TV show or a movie, you have to go to him and you lie down on his couch and you tell him how guilty you feel because of the wicked nature of the German people. And then you get a license and then you become basically a lackey of the American empire.
Just a thought before. George Marshall was really acting goofy on Pearl Harbor Day. I think he was in on the whole trap. So he had to feel a little guilty that we set it up and then we put all our energies to defeat Germany. That was always in the plan. I mean, this is pretty bad stuff we were doing.
Yes, don't underestimate the power of guilt. I'm saying this especially with regard to the Jews, because we're talking about the big picture being the Jewish revolutionary spirit, which has been in existence for 2,000 years now. Began at the foot of the cross when the Jews called for the death of Jesus Christ. 70 years later, the temple was destroyed. Now, if the temple is destroyed, the Jew has no way of expiating guilt.
No.
You have to have the sacrifice and the priesthood and the temple in order to expiate
I
guilt.
heard Alan Dershowitz say that just on a panel discussion. He said, "We don't have anything. We were blood sacrifice. We don't have that. So we have nothing." He said.
Right. So what do you do when you can't expiate guilt? You have to deal with it. Nobody can live with guilt. It drives you crazy. So what do you do? Well, the Jewish solution to that was projecting guilt. The Jew will always project guilt on you.
I got to get this off of me.
I'll project it on you. And so the Polish proverb says, the Jew cries out in pain when he strikes you. So he's always blaming you for what he does. You're always on the defensive when you're dealing with these people. You're always guilty of something. You know what I mean? Like, what did I do now? Like, what did I do now? Oh, wait a minute. I used the wrong pronoun. Damn it. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry, guys. How many times do you see this? It's like a daily basis. Joe Rogan just caved in to this pressure. He's apologizing. Everybody has to apologize.
For something.
For something. You used the wrong pronoun. You don't support abortion. You're an anti-Semite. But because on and on and on, you're always on the defensive because these people have this ingrained habit of projecting on you, projecting their guilt onto you and trying to make you feel guilty. So they did it to the German people. They did it. They succeeded.
And the Germans were weak. Their Christianity was weak.
They were divided. Okay, so what? All right, so there's a big claim. How did they do it? Well, they did it through social engineering. But who was the crucial figure here? And I think the crucial figure was Joseph Ratzinger. Crucial figure. You can't understand the church in the 20th century unless you understand Joseph Ratzinger. He was born in 1927. Das Hungerjahr, the high point of Morgenthal's plan to starve the Germans to death, is 1947 when he's 20 years old. Do you know whether you're hungry when you're 20 years old? You know whether you're hungry when you're 20 days old.
That's when you're eating the most.
You know? So he knew, and not only that, he comes from a kind of special family because his great uncle was a famous Bavarian by the name of Georg Ratzinger. His brother's named after him. And he wrote a book called Jüdisches Erwerbsleben, which is Jewish business practices. So he knew, the family tradition knew that the Jews would behave this way. Here you have a Jew, Morgenthau, everybody knows this, he's trying to starve the Germans to death out of revenge. So what do you do? What do you do?
Well, he couldn't mount up a militia attack. I mean, what could he do?
What could he do? That's a good question. Because I'm saying, so he was in the seminary at this point. He decided he was going to become a priest. He's in the seminary. And so he's a little bit removed from the problem because the seminary is off in the country and it has its own source of food and water. And they're not like in downtown Berlin where you're really in trouble. So what do you do when you're in a situation like that? What do you do? Do you give in? Do you basically try to defend what the Nazis did? No, you're not going to do that because his father didn't agree with the Nazis. Many Germans did not agree with the Nazis. They took over the country. Well, what do you do? Well, you become a priest, and then you become more and more famous. And finally, in 1959, he's appointed to a professor at the University of Bonn, and he comes to the attention of Cardinal Frings of Cologne. Now, Frings was a hero. He stood up to Morgenthau and the Americans. And he told the German people of Cologne, if you're hungry and there's a warehouse full of food, you can go into that warehouse and take that food, and it's not theft. And if there's a coal train there and you're cold, you can take the coal from the train, and it's not theft. And they coined a verb, it was called fringsen. Fringsen, which means to take something to keep yourself alive. So he was a hero. Frings was also a hero in the post-World War II period because the biggest battle at that point was obscenity. So, okay, this is the hidden grammar of the Marshall Plan. We're going to give you money, but we're going to flood the country with pornography, so you spend your money on pornography because that will take you out. That will wreck you. And that's what was going on. And Frings backed up his own Legion of Decency. It was called the Volkswachtbund. And the guy named Kalmus, who had been doing this for years, and they went toe-to-toe. And he actually, so at this point in time, we're talking about 1954, when the Jews used Ingmar Bergman's film, The Silence, to break the code in Germany, Frings encouraged them, and they had riots in theaters. Shut the production down. Because he understood how important the moral fiber was of a people to resist precisely this type of control.
Right, and how could they complain? They're saying, well, the Germans were so immoral. Well, now they're standing on what is clear a moral position, so how can you complain?
Yes, except that the Americans were dead set against. The Americans were promoting obscenity. They kept calling it free speech. So the crisis comes, So 1959, Ratzinger meets Frings. Frings is really impressed. He says to Ratzinger, we're going to have an ecumenical council. I want you to come to Rome to be my peritus, or my expert. And so he goes to Rome, and at this point, he takes over the entire Vatican Council single-handedly.
Ratzinger?
Ratzinger did.
He was, because he was that brilliant?
He was brilliant. He's a brilliant guy. But he used Frings to do it. He wrote Frings' speeches. And so the council has been prepared. Cardinal Ottaviani was the man who proposed the council to John the 23rd. The church is in a state of crisis because there's too centralized. Power is too centralized. Pius XII centralized all the power. He was a figure like Stalin or Hitler or Roosevelt because he understood how to use the radio, or Father Koch.
And the world was used to this.
So he could get on the radio and give a speech, and and he was dead now, and they needed to have a type of course correction, a devolution from the center. But Ottaviani was not stupid. He was a very smart guy, and he understood. If you read the preliminary documents, he's warning not just about the Soviet Union. He talked about communism. Everybody knew that's a problem. But he starts talking about psychiatry and Hollywood. Now, where are they? That's the United States of America. Okay, they oppose communism, but they got problems too. Well, what group? What do those two things have? What group is involved in both psychiatry and Hollywood?
Well, I was majoring in psychology at Notre Dame, and they didn't tell us, but in hindsight, it had a lot of Jewish influence.
Of course, it was the Jews. The Jews controlled both of those groups. Psychiatry was Jewish science. Everybody knew that. Hollywood was controlled by Jews. And so he's warning against this, and Ratzinger comes in and completely upsets the apple cart and says, no, we don't want to be negative anymore.
But one of the first documents of Vatican II dealt with the social media, dealt with that. I can't remember the name of it, but...
Inter Mirifica.
Right. So that was one of the first documents.
Yeah, and it's one of the stupidest and weakest, and it really is inconsequential.
Okay.
Okay, there were much better documents. Ottaviani had written much more incisive things in his preliminary documents than Inter Mirifica. Okay. But Ratzinger at this point comes in and says, let's stop being so negative. The church has nothing to fear from the modern world. Let's just proceed in a positive way. Well, what you did by doing that is basically you cut the nerve of resistance to obscenity in Germany. You just cut it. Because now...
Don't worry about it.
They were embarrassed. The church has always been embarrassed by things like the Legion of Decency because, polite people don't talk about things like Schmutz und Schund. Schmutz und Schund. Or Sittlichkeit. Let's talk about... the Americans are talking about Kinsey. Kinsey is science. Science is real. I know that because there's a guy down the street has it on a sign in his front yard. Science is real. Like Kinsey. That's real science. It was a front for his homosexuality, but nobody knew that at that point. So they go along, and what I'm saying here is this was a catastrophe for the church. I'm not denying the validity of these documents. You can't have 2,000 bishops come together and approve something that get fooled. They weren't fooled, okay? The Jews were working to subvert the document on non-Christian religions, on Nostra Aetate, and they failed. But there were statements in that document that were ambiguous, like a condemnation of anti-Semitism. You didn't define what anti-Semitism is. So how can you condemn it? What is it? Anything Jews don't like? We have to listen to the ADL, whatever they don't like? That's why we have to go along with
They probably thought maybe we should put that in there, and they weren't realizing how that could come back to bite them.
No, they didn't. Because they obviously had an understanding of it, which is the true understanding, which is basically it's a racial ideology. Okay, it's a racial understanding that Jews have bad DNA. Well, that's ridiculous. You know, everybody in the gospel, whether you were St. Peter or whether you were Caiaphas,
They're all Jewish.
They all had the same DNA. So how could that's not relevant. This was a theological distinction. The Jew is a theological construct who created himself when he killed Christ and attacked Logos.
And St. Paul is the one they hated the most because he come right out and said, a Jew is one who is circumcised in the heart, is one who is inward.
Right.
That clears the deck right there.
It ended the whole ethnic idea of an ethnic religion, and we now have a universal religion. Thanks to St. Paul, who went and talked to the Greeks. So, this was a fatal mistake for Germany, and it was a fatal mistake for the Catholic Church. And we are living with the consequences to this day. To this day. And why do I say that? Because there is now a Polish priest by the name of Dariusz Oko, professor at the University of Krakow, John Paul II University of Krakow, who is going to go on trial tomorrow in Cologne, the home of Cardinal Frings.
But he's a Polish priest.
And Cardinal Adenauer, Prime Minister Adenauer. Both of them spoke Kirsch. They didn't even speak German. They spoke Kirsch. Okay? And why is he going on trial? Because he wrote an article in a German magazine called Theologisches.
But he's in Poland. Why would he have to go to court in Germany?
Peter, have you ever heard of the European Union?
Okay, and so they could just grab you from any place.
Well, they can grab you from any place.
Wow.
Okay, so basically you abrogate the sovereignty of these countries. The Poles are upset, but basically, why is he going on trial? Because he wrote an article attacking the homosexual mafia in the Catholic Church. Wait a minute, what's this got to do with the Holocaust? What's this got to do with the Jews? Well, wait a minute. You read down who is doing it. It's a priest. Now, I don't want to judge, but I mean, the picture of him kissing another guy leads me to believe he's probably one of those people. I mean, I don't want to jump to conclusions here, but that's the impression I got. Okay, now, his name is Rothe, Father Rothe, and he's upset because Father Oko in Poland used words like the homo heresy and the homosexual mafia, okay, in that article that he wrote in Theologisches, and he basically got the German government to attack Oko. They fined Oko 4,000 euros or something like that, and Oko refused to pay, and as a result, he's now going to go on trial tomorrow. Now, what does this have to do with the Holocaust? What does this have to do with everything I just talked about? Well, it's the reason. The law, the legal basis for this suit is paragraph 130. The notorious paragraph 130, which is against Volksverhetzung, which is difficult
Stirring
to
up the people.
Yeah, you're stirring up the people. Incitement.
Incitement.
So what does that mean? That means and then they go to list the groups, and you go down there, it's religion, it's ethnicity, wait a minute, homosexuality, sexual orientation, not part of it. It's not in the law. Now, where did this law come from? This law was created to fight Holocaust denial. I think it was passed in the 1990s. It was passed to fight Holocaust denial because of Jewish pressure. Because the Jews' Holocaust narrative blew up in the 1990s. It was a disaster for that narrative. First of all, because of the evidence that had come up in various trials.
You mean like Fred Lichtner? And
Fred Leutner, who testified at the Zundel trial, and also Fauci, the French professor's research into the gas chambers. So it was beleaguered. They couldn't refute what these people said. And so they said, okay, what's to make it illegal? Illegal to talk about it. Well, wait a minute. You just contradicted the German Constitution, which guarantees you the right to free speech. How are you going to adjudicate this? Well, we'll find out tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Friday. And we won't find out Friday because the trial won't be concluded on Friday. But this is a crisis now for the German state. Are they going to remain true to the Constitution, or are they going to simply hand over their lives to Jewish commissars through paragraph 130? Now, who is the Judas here? Who is the Judas in this whole story? It's the homosexual mafia in the Catholic Church who are working for the Jews. America Magazine works hand in glove with George Soros. The Jesuits are now running the Catholic Church. The Jesuits are now responsible for the synodal way. You know, all this type of stuff. The survey, we're all supposed to go and talk, and popes, 1.2 billion people. What do 1.2 billion Catholics want? Well, if you look at the Germans, they've already told you. Let the divorced and remarried go to communion and change the church's teaching on homosexuality.
And that's what the people voted for?
The people have spoken.
So they said.
Vox populi, vox dei. What more can we say? This is preposterous. This is not the German people. If the German people had their say, if they were free, they'd say, the people of Germany want you to abolish paragraph 130 because it's completely tyrannical contravention of our Constitution.
Now, we were going to, maybe I'm jumping too far ahead, but we were going to include the trucking situation there in Canada. Does any of this come together? Is there anything where any of this fits?
Yes, yes. So there's what's his name? No, I've forgotten his name. Is it Bernie Leiber, a Jew who was the head of the World Jewish Congress? He's now got his own organization, like Anti-Hate Canada or something like that. Trudeau gave him a quarter.
Yeah, he got. Yeah, I saw that. He got $250,000.
Yeah, he got $250,000 from Trudeau to create this anti-hate speech organization. Well, as soon as you hear hate speech, that's a Jewish creation. The ADL created it. They brag about how they created it. It got dragged out during the whole internet battle during 2019 when people were getting deplatformed. And now it's being waged against the truckers. So Leiber, I think I got his name right, comes up with this thing, this basically a flyer that was basically given, found it on a truck. Honest to God, I found it on a truck in Ottawa.
No, but somebody matched it to something else, some other place.
Well, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Don't distract me from my. So and what does it say on there? Well, it has all of the Jews who were involved in the vaccine mandates. So Borla, head of Pfizer, he's a Jew. Rachel Walensky, so on and so forth. The Star of David next to him. Well, this is awful to say that, but it turns out he didn't find it on a truck in Ottawa. Someone sent it from Florida. So it's a complete false flag operation. But what are we trying to do here? We're using the Holocaust now to basically beat these truckers into submission. And Trudeau is completely on board with this type of thing. He's calling, first of all, Trudeau is the Pete Buttigieg of Canada. He's at war with his own people, okay? He represents oligarchic interests. He wants to impose the oligarchic rules on Canada. And the latest project the oligarchs gave him was COVID, which is a war, biological warfare against the entire human race to bring them under control and destroy representative government.
And these truckers have enough leisure time because it's kind of a contemplative job. And they have come together to a conclusion that that's tyranny and that's wrong and that's not Canada and that's not us.
That's right. So nobody did this. If it were, the CIA does this all the time. They have an Institute for Democracy or National Endowment for Democracy, is basically does color revolutions. And they just did one in Kazakhstan, basically to attack Russia, to distract them from the Ukraine so they could roll over the Ukraine. And it didn't work. The Russians
But the truckers, just like January 6th, because I was there at January 6th, and a lot of people say, yeah, it was just like a prayer meeting. Well, it doesn't take, you give them anything, and they can pull off a color revolution.
Right.
These truckers are onto that, and they're not giving them a thing. They can't even, they had to get that from some other place to get that flyer. The truckers aren't giving them anything.
No, this is clearly, but the point I'm saying, so you said, what's the connection? That's the connection. That's the connection. You have a Jewish commissar who's going to work with Trudeau to basically demonize the Canadian people by using the Holocaust. By using the Holocaust narrative, by calling them anti-Semites and Nazis. That's identity theft. Remember we talked about
And then the people are going to be appalled. I can't support this.
Right. Polite people do not want to associate with Nazis and anti-Semites. I didn't know these truckers were like that. I'm going home. Well, it turns out they're not like that. And it was created by a Jewish propagandist, like a descendant of Ilya Ehrenburg, the Soviet propagandist who told the Soviet army to go kill Germans and rape their women. Is it a direct descendant? Because that's what they do. That's what they do. And they're doing it in Canada now. And so now Trudeau had a moment of opportunity. If he were a smart politician, he would have done what Boris Johnson did in England. So Boris Johnson is on the ropes. He's on the ropes. He's ready to go down because they've got videos of him at parties at number 10 Downing Street.
Without his mask?
Nobody's wearing masks.
Can't
Put your
believe it.
mask on, for God's sake, Boris. Put your mask on.
It's that simple. Can't you do it?
So he's just laughing. He's drinking wine, laughing at hoi polloi, because they're following these stupid rules. We don't have to follow those rules. We're masters of the universe. So he's in trouble, and everybody's clamoring for his resignation. And he makes a brilliant move. He walks in and he says, "COVID is over." It was brilliant. I mean, I have to give him credit, because basically what he did was take the power back from the medical oligarchs. So it was like a stupid Trump.
Which was always the government's to begin with.
Right. He handed the political power to the medical oligarchs, and they realized, holy shit, I'm getting a beating. And they're getting all the
And I'm in
advantage.
charge. This can't be.
So I'm taking it back. Now, Trump was too stupid to do this. Trump didn't understand what was going on. He brought Fauci in. Why would you bring Fauci? Fauci's your enemy.
He's right out of New York. He should have known who he was.
Fauci, what are you doing?
Everybody knew who he was.
He was notorious, first of all, because of the AIDS debacle. Fauci fast-tracked AZT, which killed more homosexuals than Genghis Khan.
Yes.
Okay.
Arthur Ashe, Magic Johnson.
The difference was that Arthur Ashe was a docile medicine taker, and it killed him. AZT is toxic. It's one of the most toxic substances known to man. And the stupid homosexuals clamored for it, and Fauci ran and gave them what they wanted and killed them. And now he's supposed to be some type of hero because he did that. So now he's in charge. Okay, Fauci gets the benefit, and Trump gets the shit kicked out of him. And then Biden takes his place, and he's getting the shit kicked out of him, because he's going to pay the price in November, when the Democrats are going to be driven from office completely. They better rig a lot of elections, because they're going to lose across the board, because everyone hates them now.
What do you think is going to happen with that trucker movement? It's all over the world. Can it be defeated, or is this it's in the fourth quarter, the game is tied. Where is this thing at? I mean, people are curious as to what you think. I mean,
okay,
you're not a prophet.
I am a prophet.
Okay.
I have no honor in my native place. But so the truckers are there, and they're vulnerable. Okay, they're vulnerable because they're basically acting out of what they consider the goodwill of the sovereign. So it's like the Russian serfs. They come to St. Petersburg because they love the Tsar. And the idea is, if only the Tsar could listen to us and hear what we're saying, he would change things and make it good for us. And so they show up, and what does the Tsar do? Makes a mistake and sends the Cossacks out, and he radicalizes all the serfs and paves the way to the Russian Revolution. Okay? Now, if Trudeau were smart, he would have done what Boris Johnson did. Okay? All right, you blew that opportunity. You missed that opportunity because you're a good, docile servant of the oligarchs. You're the Pete Buttigieg of Canada. So now what? You should talk to the truckers. The Indian ambassador did a little video in which he said, this hypocrite Trudeau criticized Modi for not talking to the farmers in India. If I were Prime Minister of India, I would have talked to those farmers, Trudeau said. Well, guess what? You're ignoring the truckers.
He's afraid of them.
He's afraid of them because he doesn't have a position, because he's a weak man. He knows he's a pawn. He knows he's a pawn of the oligarchs. That's the only reason he has his job, other than being Fidel Castro's son. Other than that, what qualifications do you have? So he's now, they both painted themselves into a corner. That's the problem. You got the truckers now, they're working now step by, it's like a siege. It's like a siege. The truckers are under siege now. Okay, you surround the city, or you surround the trucks, you cut them off from fuel, which is what they're doing right now. Cut them off from food and fuel. So eventually the trucks are going to run out of fuel, and then what? Then what's going to happen then? They tried to call tow truck company, I heard this, and the tow truck company said, no, we all have COVID, and hung up. So they're not going to tow the truckers. So you now, according to the report, you have hundreds of cops coming to Ottawa to arrest the truckers. Now, how is that going to come out? How is that going to come out? I see it bad outcome for both sides. Okay, let's assume that they do arrest the people. First of all, the Canadian people were one of the most docile groups of people on the face of the earth. And what happened is, what did you do? You radicalized them.
Yeah.
You radicalized a group of people. Now, if you go through with this thing, you will have a real serious problem, because you can't govern people like this. Canada is a huge country, and it's sparsely populated.
My job takes me up there a lot, and so, not in the last couple of years, but I get the impression they're fierce. They are docile. They didn't join the revolution, okay, right? They're the
right.
Okay,
right.
But when it comes to certain types of freedom, they're really
okay.
They're really tough.
So what do you have? What's the situation? You were free to just go off on your own in Canada, because there's so much space out there. You got your truck. You go off to wherever you are in Winnipeg or Regina or whatever it is. You live outside, and they leave you alone, and everything's okay. Well, you ruined that. The government interfered. The government overplayed their hand, and now you attack the truckers. You will radicalize the entire Canadian population, because they are already on the side of the truckers, and they hate Trudeau. Truck Fudo is one of the memes that I've been seeing there. So the only way to break this logjam would be for Trudeau to go and meet with the truckers, but he's not going to do that. The Tsar should have met with the serfs. He didn't do it. It's the biggest mistake that Tsar ever made, and the whole monarchy collapsed. So we don't know. We don't know what the outcome is, but we know that that's the confrontation that's building right now. And if he does crack down, it's only going to make the situation worse. You'll have a radicalized population that you will not be able to rule, because you will have lost your legitimacy.
Now, how does that affect the local community here? How does that affect the United States? Is that going to affect anything?
Yeah, the United States is already backing away. So what you're going to see in Canada, as in the United States, Ottawa will fail, and then you'll see the rise in power of places like Saskatchewan, which will now take the leadership role in the province and end the COVID thing there, the way that DeSantis is doing in Florida.
It's almost, maybe you can't say it, but you got the Catholic Church. They're so disappointed in the Pope that if somebody rises up and says, no, I'm getting rid of the vaccine mandate like they are in Saskatchewan, people are they're going to, I mean, it's not just happening, it's happening at the political level, but it seems like there's...
Right, the biggest failure of the church in the 21st century has been the fact that it's gone over to defending oligarchic narratives like COVID. It's a tragedy. The Jesuits are responsible. They should be suppressed now, but not when the Pope is a Jesuit. That's not going to happen. But I think that's the situation. I think that's, we don't know. The crucial, to things we have to wait for. One of the things, what's going to happen in Germany? Is Father Oko going to go to jail for criticizing homosexuals?
Finland's got a problem on that same regard up there.
You do that, meine deutsche Kollegen, tun Sie das bitte nicht. Dann bekommt der Krieg, nochmal ein Krieg zwischen Polen und Deutschland. It will be a culture war between Poland and Germany.
Because Poland never did take the whole sexual gender thing.
It's like night and day, and that's the situation. So is Germany going to pull back from the brink and reaffirm the Constitution, or are they going to go whole hog into homosexual, i.e. homosexual Jewish tyranny?
See, it happens in a family. Are you going to accept the homosexual? It was happening in the men that I know here. They were challenged to accept it, and they didn't. But, what are you going to do? You have a grandson that's a homosexual? Are you going to
make wrong right? Well, the Synod has spoken. Yes, we're going to make wrong right. The Synod, Germany has basically separated itself from the Catholic Church. You cannot propose these things and be part of the Catholic Church, and that's how we're going to have to leave it.
Because it's basically
right
it's a type of heresy.
Homo heresy is what Father Oko called it. So we'll get back together the next time when we have something to say about the events that are about to happen this week.
Okay, well, I'm glad you came on. People have been asking you to come on. And the South Bend Tribune is not doing it. We have public access. I still meet people that are thankful for it. It's not like it was before YouTube. Before YouTube was public access was everything. So Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media with Dr. E. Michael Jones.